My life, for the past 2 decades, had been a quiet, predictable symphony. A gentle rhythm of morning tea by the window overlooking my meticulously kept rose garden, afternoons lost in the pages of classic literature, and evenings spent contemplating the subtle shifts of the twilight sky. I was Alara Vance, a retired English teacher, a widow, a woman whose existence seemed as placid as the surface of a forgotten pond. People often mistook my quiet demeanor for fragility, my love for solitude for an inability to cope with the modern world. They were wrong. And Christmas Eve, of all nights, was about to prove just how wrong they were. The unease had started a week before, a low thrum beneath my ribs, persistent as a distant drumbeat. It wasn't anything I could pinpoint, no ominous phone calls, no cryptic messages. Just a cold dread, a mother's instinct, thin as ice but sharp enough to pierce the festive cheer of the season. Sarah, my daughter, had sounded perfectly fine on our last call, bubbling with plans for the Sterling family's grand Christmas celebration. Mark, her husband, always so charming, so successful, had even sent me a polite text wishing me well. Yet, the cold dread persisted, tightening its grip with each passing day. I told myself it was just the loneliness of the holidays, the natural anxiety of an aging parent. But by late afternoon on Christmas Eve, as the first snowflakes began to dance outside my window, a decision solidified within me, urgent and undeniable. I needed to see her. Not for a planned visit, but now. Breaking my own steadfast tradition of a quiet Christmas at home, I grabbed my car keys, a small emergency bag, and drove. The drive was a blur of twinkling lights and festive carols from the radio, a stark contrast to the churning storm in my gut. Every lamppost adorned with garlands, every house glowing with cheer, felt like a mockery of my growing anxiety. Sarah's suburban neighborhood, usually so perfectly manicured, looked like a scene from a holiday card, immaculate lawns, glittering icicles, the scent of pine and cinnamon hanging heavy in the crisp air. And then I saw her house. It was a beacon of warmth and celebration. Every window blazed with light, revealing glimpses of a perfectly decorated interior. Laughter, clear and boisterous, drifted out into the frosty night, punctuated by the clinking of glasses. Carols played softly from within, a comforting, familiar sound. But then, I saw her. Huddled on the cold stone steps of the front porch, half hidden behind a planter overflowing with dormant evergreens, was my Sarah. My vibrant, beautiful daughter. She was wearing a thick sweater, but it did little to ward off the chill or the tremors that shook her slender frame. Her face was buried in her knees, her shoulders heaving with silent sobs that tore at my heart. And then, as she slowly lifted her head, catching sight of my car pulling up, I saw it. A deep, purpling bruise blooming high on her left cheekbone, a grotesque flower against her pale skin. The world tilted. The laughter from inside, the twinkling lights, the gentle snowfall, all faded into a meaningless background hum. My quiet symphony shattered. The cold dread I'd felt earlier transmuted into something far more potent, far more dangerous, a searing, righteous fury that ignited every dormant corner of my soul. I practically leaped from the car, leaving the door ajar, and rushed to her side. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice raw, though I barely recognized it. I knelt, ignoring the bite of the cold concrete on my knees, and pulled her into my arms. She felt so fragile, so broken, a mere wisp of the woman I knew. Her body trembled, and her sobs, though still silent, intensified against my shoulder. I held her, stroking her hair, my gaze fixed on that horrific mark on her face. A mother's hands, once accustomed to turning pages and tending roses, now clenched into fists. The carols from inside suddenly sounded distant, the laughter hollow. I felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and clear, sharpening my senses. I smelled pine, yes, and cinnamon, but also something else, the faint, metallic scent of fear clinging to my daughter's clothes. I heard the faint clinking of ice in a glass, the low murmur of voices, oblivious, uncaring. My mind, usually so orderly, worked with terrifying efficiency. There was no room for hesitation, no space for doubt. This wasn't a discussion. This wasn't an argument. This was a violation. And it was going to stop. I helped Sarah to her feet, her gaze still averted, her body stiff with a fear that went beyond the bruise. Her silence was more damning than any scream. With her trembling hand clutched tightly in mine, I pushed open the heavy oak door. The warmth of the house washed over us, a suffocating wave of cheer and denial. The Sterling family was gathered around the magnificent stone fireplace, champagne flutes glinting in the soft glow of the fire. Mark, handsome and impeccably dressed, was holding court, a dazzling smile on his face as he toasted his parents, Evelyn and Liam Sterling, a formidable duo in their own right, matriarch and patriarch of a dynasty built on reputation and unspoken power. Their heads turned, startled by our unexpected entrance. The smiles froze. The clinking glasses fell silent. Mark's eyes, usually so warm and engaging, narrowed almost imperceptibly as they flickered from me, to Sarah's bowed head, and then, with a terrifying swiftness, to the bruise on her face. For a fleeting second, his charming mask slipped, revealing a flicker of something cold and utterly ruthless. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a practiced concern. Ilara. Sarah. What a surprise. Mom, why didn't you tell us you were coming? Mark's voice was smooth, a little too loud, a little too jovial. He started towards us, his arms outstretched, the picture of an aggrieved but welcoming husband. But I didn't move. I simply stood there, my hand still gripping Sarah's, her fragile weight leaning against me. My gaze met Mark's. It was not the gaze of a polite, elderly guest. It was the gaze of a predator, sensing a threat, and I felt a chilling satisfaction as I saw the barest hint of discomfort, of recognition, in his eyes. He saw something in me he hadn't expected. He saw the storm behind the placid surface. The cheerful music had faded. The crackle of the fire was the only sound. All eyes were on us. I took a deep breath, the scent of pine and expensive champagne filling my lungs, a strange blend of holiday cheer and imminent destruction. My voice, when it came, was not loud, but it was clear, cutting through the silence like ice. I looked at Mark, truly looked at him, into the depths of his calculating eyes, and I knew. The illusion was over. The quiet life was over. The battle had begun. This stops, I said, my voice resonating with an authority I hadn't known I possessed. My eyes never left his. Tonight. And forever. The 6 words hung in the air, thick and heavy, silencing the room more effectively than any shouted command. Mark's outstretched hands, once poised for a theatrical embrace, slowly fell to his sides. His face, usually so adept at masking emotion, was a blank slate for a fraction of a second, then tightened with barely suppressed fury. Evelyn Sterling, poised and elegant by the fireplace, had gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Liam, her husband, looked at me with an expression that combined cold disdain with a flicker of calculation. The children, Owen and Lily, had appeared from another room, drawn by the sudden quiet, their young faces registering confusion, then fear, as they saw their mother's bruised cheek and my unyielding stance. Ilara, what on earth are you talking about? Mark finally managed, his voice strained, though he tried to infuse it with wounded innocence. Sarah, darling, what has your mother put in your head? But Sarah, clutching my hand as if it were her only lifeline, remained silent, her head still bowed. Her silence was a palpable thing, a heavy cloak woven from fear and shame. She's saying what needs to be said, Mark, I replied, my voice unwavering. Pack your children's things, Sarah. We're leaving. Chaos erupted. Evelyn shrieked, leave? On Christmas Eve? You'll do no such thing, Ilara Vance. Liam stepped forward, his lawyer's face etched with practiced outrage. This is preposterous. You can't just abduct my grandchildren. But I wasn't listening. My focus was on Sarah, whose eyes, wide and terrified, finally met mine. I saw the struggle within her, the ingrained fear battling against a desperate, nascent hope. Sarah, I urged gently, for them. For Owen and Lily. We have to go. It was a small, almost imperceptible nod, but it was enough. With a strength I hadn't known she possessed, Sarah pulled her hand from mine, strode to the children, and took their hands. Owen, Lily. Go upstairs. Get your backpacks. Put in some clothes, your toothbrushes. Quickly, please. Owen, 14, a boy on the cusp of manhood, looked from his mother's face to mine, then to his father's furious expression. A flicker of understanding, of horror, crossed his features. Lily, 10, clutching a plush toy, was already crying silently. They obeyed, their small figures vanishing up the grand staircase. Mark lunged forward, but I stepped in front of Sarah, blocking his path. Don't, I warned, my voice low but laced with steel. Don't make this worse than it already is. The next 20 minutes were a blur of hushed urgency and escalating threats. Mark followed us from room to room as Sarah, miraculously composed, gathered essential items for the children. He alternated between pleading, cajoling, and openly menacing, his voice a low, dangerous growl. You will regret this, Elara. You'll regret interfering. Sarah, darling, don't listen to her. She's old, she doesn't understand. He tried to take Owen's backpack from him, but the boy clung to it, his young face tight with defiance. Even Lily, her tears still flowing, pulled away from her father's touch. The sight of their fear, their silent rejection, only fueled the fire within me. Finally, we were out the door, the biting cold of the winter night a welcome reprieve from the stifling atmosphere of the Sterling home. I bundled Sarah and the children into my old sedan, ignoring Mark's enraged shouts and Evelyn's hysterical cries from the doorstep. As I pulled away, glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw the imposing Sterling mansion, no longer a beacon of festive cheer, but a fortress of deceit, its lights now seeming cold and predatory. The drive to my small house, 30 minutes away, passed in almost complete silence. Sarah sat rigid in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, a profound emptiness in her eyes. Owen and Lily huddled in the back, the shock of the evening keeping them subdued. I kept glancing at Sarah, at the bruise that seemed to pulse in the dim light of the dashboard. My heart ached for her, for the years of pain I now realized she must have silently endured. How had I, her mother, been so blind? So caught up in my books and my garden, in the illusion of her perfect life? The shame burned, hot and bitter. Once at my house, a quiet haven filled with the scent of old paper and dried lavender, the silence continued. Sarah moved like a ghost, helping me settle the children in the spare room. They barely spoke, accepting hot cocoa and my offer of comfortable pajamas with listless obedience. Lily fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by the emotional turmoil. Owen, though, stayed awake, his eyes wide and watchful, darting nervously between his mother and me. Mom, he whispered finally, as I tucked him in, is Mom going to be okay? I squeezed his hand. She will be, Owen. I promise you. We all will be. The words felt heavy, a promise I was now bound to keep, no matter the cost. After the children were settled, I tried to talk to Sarah. We sat in my small living room, the only light coming from the gentle glow of the Christmas tree I'd decorated earlier in the week, a lone, hopeful beacon. She stared into the flickering fairy lights, her face a mask of exhaustion and despair. Sarah, I began, my voice soft, what happened? Who did this? She flinched at my words, as if the sound of them alone was a fresh wound. She wrapped her arms around herself, hugging her knees to her chest. It doesn't matter, Mom. It's always something. He just gets angry sometimes. Her voice was a thin thread, barely audible. He didn't mean it. He promised. He always promises. My blood ran cold. This isn't just sometimes, Sarah. This is a pattern. And it's not okay. I pointed to her bruised cheek. This is not something you just get over. This is abuse. She recoiled, as if the word itself was a physical blow. No. It's not. He's a good father. A good provider. People look up to him. He has a lot of pressure. He drinks sometimes. It's my fault, I make him angry. The practiced words, the justifications, tumbled out, rote and desperate. The insidious manipulation was clearly deeply ingrained. My heart twisted. This wasn't my Sarah, not the vibrant, witty woman I'd raised. This was a shadow, a victim. I wanted to shake her, to scream at her, to make her see the truth. But I knew that wouldn't help. What she needed was not judgment, but protection. Strength. My strength. The first phone call came an hour later. Mark. His voice, once smooth and charming, was now laced with an icy fury that sent shivers down my spine. Elara, he began, no pleasantries, you listen to me. You have exactly 1 hour to bring my wife and children back home. They belong here, with their father. You are interfering in my family, and you are breaking the law. This is kidnapping. They are safe, Mark, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. And they will stay safe. This isn't kidnapping. This is sanctuary. His laughter was a sharp, unpleasant sound. Sanctuary? You think your little shack can protect them from me? You have no idea who you're dealing with, old woman. I have lawyers. I have influence. I have connections. You will regret this. I will make sure you regret this for the rest of your miserable life. And Sarah? She'll lose everything. Including her children. The threat was clear, precise, and delivered with chilling conviction. He hung up before I could respond, leaving the silence of my living room feeling suddenly vast and menacing. My hands trembled slightly as I put the phone down, but a strange calm settled over me. Fear, yes, was a cold companion. But it was overshadowed by something else, a fierce, protective fire that had lain dormant for decades. For too long, I had been Elara Vance, the quiet widow, the retired teacher, content with her garden and her books. But I was also the daughter of a woman who had faced hardship with unyielding courage, a woman who had taught me that sometimes, to protect what you love, you had to become a force of nature yourself. I walked to my bookshelf, my fingers tracing the spines of worn classics, Austen, Dickens, the Bronte sisters. Stories of quiet women finding extraordinary strength in the face of adversity. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window, a frail-looking woman with silver hair and tired eyes. But in those eyes, a new resolve was burning. A plan, still nascent, began to form in the quiet corners of my mind. It wouldn't be pretty. It wouldn't be easy. But it would be necessary. This quiet life, this tranquil existence, was now a disguise. A perfect, unassuming mask. And behind it, a war was brewing. For my daughter. For my grandchildren. I would fight. And I would win. The early hours of Christmas Day were not filled with joyous carols or the rustle of wrapping paper, but with the heavy silence of unspoken pain. Sarah eventually drifted into a fitful sleep on my couch, exhausted by the emotional battering. I sat awake, watching the slow, gray dawn filter through the window, my mind racing. Mark's threats echoed in my ears, chillingly clear. He truly believed he was untouchable. And, to a large extent, he was right. By morning, the children were still subdued, but the gentle comfort of my home, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and the simple breakfast I prepared seemed to offer a fragile sense of security. Owen, still guarded, ate quietly. Lily, however, clung to Sarah, her small hand never leaving her mother's side. The bruise on Sarah's face was now a deeper, more ominous purple, a constant, ugly reminder of the night's horror. "We need to talk, Sarah," I said gently, after the children had retreated to the living room to watch a cartoon, a temporary reprieve from their anxieties. Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on her clasped hands. "I know, Mom." Her voice was still quiet, fragile. "He'll come for us. He always does. He'll make it impossible for me to leave. He'll say I'm unstable, that I'm unfit. He's done it before. My heart ached at the resigned despair in her tone. "Tell me everything," I urged. "From the beginning. I need to understand what we're up against." And so, haltingly at first, then with a slow, agonizing trickle, Sarah began to speak. It was a story woven from years of subtle psychological manipulation, financial control, and escalating emotional abuse, punctuated by terrifying bursts of physical violence that always left her feeling utterly worthless and utterly trapped. Mark was a master of gaslighting, of turning every incident back on her, making her doubt her own sanity, her own memories. He isolated her from friends, subtly undermining her confidence until she believed she had no one. He controlled their finances, even though she had a successful career before marrying him, leaving her dependent on him for every major decision. The incidents, as she called them, were always followed by remorseful apologies, lavish gifts, and promises of change, promises that invariably crumbled within weeks, only to be replaced by another cycle of cruelty. "He told me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "that if I ever tried to leave, he would make sure I lost the children. He said he has enough dirt on me, fabricated things, trivial mistakes blown out of proportion, to paint me as an unfit mother. And with his family's connections, he could do it. He told me no one would ever believe me over him. He's Mark Sterling, after all." The name hung in the air, imbued with an almost mythical power. Mark Sterling, successful entrepreneur, pillar of the community, generous philanthropist. His public persona was impeccable, a fortress of respectability. Who would believe the bruised wife of such a man, particularly when he had the formidable legal and social machinery of the Sterling family behind him? "We have to go to the police, Sarah," I insisted. "We have the bruise. Your testimony." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "It won't be enough, Mom. He knows how to cover his tracks. He's never left a witness, never left undeniable proof. It's always an accident, or I walked into a door, or she's just overwrought. He's charming. He's convincing. And his father, Liam, is a former district attorney. He knows the system inside out. He'll tear me apart in court." Despite her fear, a flicker of my own hope remained. "We have to try." I drove Sarah to the local police precinct later that day, the festive atmosphere of Christmas outside feeling jarringly inappropriate. The officer on duty, a kindly-looking man, listened patiently. Then he introduced us to Detective Harper, a young but sharp-eyed detective, whose initial politeness gave way to a weary familiarity as we laid out Sarah's story. Detective Harper was sympathetic, but his words were a stark confirmation of Sarah's fears. "Mrs. Vance Sterling, I understand this is incredibly difficult. And Mrs. Vance, I commend your courage. But without a truly clear, undeniable pattern of evidence, multiple documented incidents, medical reports that contradict accidental injury, or ideally, an eyewitness or incontrovertible proof, a single incident, especially one where the victim is hesitant to press charges, is very difficult to prosecute. Especially against someone with Mr. Sterling's standing." He explained the complexities. Mark would simply deny everything, or claim it was an argument that got out of hand, an accidental bump. Without Sarah's unwavering testimony and a mountain of evidence, it would be a he-said-she-said case, one the Sterlings would undoubtedly win, leaving Sarah even more vulnerable and exposed. Mr. Sterling has an excellent legal team. His father, Liam Sterling, is a very well-connected man. They would discredit your daughter, paint her as emotionally unstable, perhaps even bring up past marital disagreements to undermine her credibility. He looked at me, a hint of genuine concern in his eyes. "And honestly, Mrs. Vance, it would put both you and your daughter in a very precarious position, legally and financially." My heart sank. Sarah's assessment had been brutally accurate. The system, designed to protect, was often powerless against those who knew how to manipulate it. As if on cue, my phone rang the moment we stepped out of the precinct. It was Evelyn Sterling. Her voice, usually perfectly modulated, was now brittle with barely contained fury. Elara, she snapped, this has gone far enough. You've humiliated our family. You've turned my grandchildren against their father. If you do not return Sarah and the children home by tomorrow morning, my son will press full charges of kidnapping. And Liam? Liam will ensure you lose everything. Your house, your pension, your reputation. You will become a pariah. Do you understand me? Her words were precise, surgical, aimed directly at my vulnerabilities. The quiet life I treasured, the financial security I'd carefully built, all of it was suddenly under threat. I gripped the phone, my knuckles white. Evelyn, your son is an abuser. Sarah and the children are not going anywhere. You naive old fool, Evelyn hissed, her composure finally cracking. You think you can fight us? You have no idea the power you're up against. You will regret this. Believe me. You will. She hung up, leaving me standing on the cold pavement, the weight of her threat pressing down on me. I looked at Sarah, whose face was now etched with a deeper despair. See, Mom? I told you. They're too powerful. We should just go back. Maybe it'll be different this time. For the children's sake. The defeat in her voice was a knife in my gut. But even as fear tried to creep in, something else hardened inside me. A resolve. They believed they were untouchable. They believed my quiet life meant I was weak. They believed they could break me, just as they had broken Sarah. They were about to learn how very wrong they were. The system might not be able to help us, but I was not limited by the system. My mother, God rest her soul, had always said, when the door is locked, find a window. If the window is barred, find a shovel. And if you can't find a shovel, use your bare hands. She had faced down difficult men in difficult times, in ways that would never make it into polite conversation. I was her daughter. I looked at the sterling name, so carefully polished, so powerfully proclaimed. A thin web of lies, held together by money and influence. I knew, with absolute certainty, that somewhere beneath that gleaming surface, there were threads that could be pulled, knots that could be unraveled. And I, Elara Vance, the unassuming widow with a penchant for literature, was about to become the spider. A very patient, very determined spider. My mind, once filled with the lyrical prose of novels, now began to map out strategies, to consider weaknesses. I would need help, yes. But not the kind of help that worked within the system. I would need someone who understood the shadows. Someone who knew how to dig. And a name, long dormant in the archives of my memory, flickered to life. Arthur Fisher. Artie. A man I hadn't seen in decades, a man who, in a past life, had taught me a thing or two about finding what people didn't want to be found. A man who understood the language of silence and the power of a hidden truth. The quiet woman was gone. In her place, a new Elara was being forged, tempered by fear and fueled by an unshakable maternal fury. The game had changed. And I, for one, was ready to play. The days that followed Christmas were a strange blend of quiet domesticity and simmering tension. My small house, usually a haven of solitude, was now filled with the hesitant movements of Sarah and the children. I tried to create a sense of normalcy for Owen and Lily, baking cookies, reading aloud from holiday stories, making sure they had warm clothes and familiar toys. But the shadow of Mark and his family hung over us, a constant, chilling presence. Sarah remained fragile, plagued by doubt and terror, her fear of losing the children a constant battle against her desire for freedom. Meanwhile, Mark's campaign of intimidation began in earnest. The phone calls were relentless, from Mark himself, shifting from feigned concern to barely veiled threats, and from the Sterling family's lawyers, formal and menacing, demanding Sarah's immediate return and threatening legal action for parental abduction and emotional distress. My answering machine quickly filled with these recorded pronouncements, each one tightening the knot of anxiety in Sarah's stomach. But each call, each threat, only hardened my resolve. They thought they could break us with fear. They underestimated a mother's fury, and a grandmother's cunning. My first step was to reconnect with Artie Fisher. He was a ghost from a different lifetime, a time when I was younger, bolder, and perhaps a little more reckless. Artie had been a police detective then, a friend of my late husband, known for his unconventional methods and a knack for seeing what others missed. After a brief career in law enforcement, he'd retired early, disillusioned, and had supposedly vanished into a quiet life, much like my own. But I knew better. Artie always kept an ear to the ground. Finding him wasn't easy. It took several days of calling old, barely remembered contacts, some of whom were as surprised to hear from me as I was to hear their voices after so long. Finally, I tracked him down to a sleepy coastal town a few hours north. He was running a small, unassuming bookstore, a perfect cover for a man who preferred to observe rather than be observed. I left Sarah a careful note, promising to return quickly, and drove north, the salty air of the coast a welcome change from the oppressive stillness of my own home. Artie hadn't changed much, despite the passage of decades. His hair was thinner, streaked with gray, and his face was more lined, but the sharp, observant eyes, the slight, knowing smirk, were instantly recognizable. He greeted me with a surprised but genuine warmth, offering me a mug of strong, black coffee in his dusty, book-filled shop. Elara Vance, he mused, leaning back in a worn armchair, a book open on his lap. The Quiet Force. What brings you out of your scholarly retreat, my dear? I can't imagine you're here for first editions. I laid out the story, carefully, methodically, leaving out no detail. Sarah's bruised face, Mark's charming facade, the Sterling family's chilling influence, the police's hands-tied helplessness. Artie listened, his gaze unblinking, occasionally nodding, sometimes asking a precise, incisive question. When I finished, the silence in the shop was broken only by the gentle ticking of an antique clock. So, he said finally, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow, the golden boy Sterling. I remember his father, Liam. Sharp as a tack, ruthless as a shark. Good at making problems disappear. He took a sip of his coffee. You're asking me to go against a very powerful machine, Elara. They play dirty. And they play for keeps. I know, I replied, my voice steady. And I have no illusions. But I also know that machine has weak points. Every empire has cracks. And I have to find them. For Sarah. For Owen and Lily. I can't let him destroy her, Artie. I can't let him win. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, seeing beyond the gentle facade of the retired teacher. He saw the fire, the fear, and the unyielding determination that had been hidden for so long. A flicker of respect, perhaps even admiration, entered his eyes. You always were a fighter, Elara, even when you pretended otherwise. All right. I'm in. But you need to understand, we operate in the shadows. We don't have badges or legal mandates. We bend the rules. Sometimes we break them. I understand, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. With Artie, I felt a surge of hope, a tangible sense of an ally in the dark. Our initial investigation was subtle, almost invisible. Artie, with his network of old contacts and his uncanny ability to sift through public records, started digging into Mark Sterling's past. I, in turn, used my own unique advantage, my invisibility. Who would suspect a quiet, elderly woman, perhaps looking a little lost, of being anything other than harmless? I began by immersing myself in the world of Mark Sterling. I pored over online articles, business journals, charity gala photos. His public image was flawless, a self-made man, a visionary in real estate, devoted husband and father. But even in the glossiest articles, I looked for the subtle tells, the slight tightness around his eyes in photos where he was smiling, the way his hand gripped Sarah's arm a little too tightly in some candid shots. I read between the lines, using my literary analysis skills to deconstruct his carefully curated narrative. I started visiting places where Mark was known to frequent, his downtown office building, the upscale cafes where he conducted meetings, the exclusive golf club where he held memberships. I dressed nondescriptly, often carrying a book, pretending to read, while my ears and eyes were wide open. I learned the rhythms of his life, the habits of his employees, the whispers in the periphery. One afternoon, sitting in a bustling cafe not far from Sterling Realty, I overheard two junior brokers talking about Mark's aggressive tactics in a recent land deal, and a hushed reference to a troublesome planning commission member who suddenly dropped out. It was nothing concrete, but it was a crack, a tiny fissure in the gleaming facade. It told me Mark wasn't just charming, he was ruthless. The unsettling feeling of being watched began around this time. It started subtly, a car parked down the street from my house for a little too long, a feeling of eyes on my back as I walked through the grocery store. I dismissed it at first, attributing it to paranoia. But then, it became more specific. An anonymous phone call where the only sound was heavy breathing before the line went dead. A strange car, a dark sedan, that seemed to follow me for a few blocks before disappearing. One morning, I went out to tend my rose garden, a ritual that usually brought me solace. But as I approached the beds, my heart seized. Several of my prize-winning roses, cultivated over years with painstaking care, had been brutally cut down, their petals scattered across the snow-dusted ground. It wasn't random vandalism. It was a message. A clear, chilling warning. We know where you are. We can get to what you love. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with a cold, clear fury. They thought they could scare me back into my quiet life, back into my place. They thought they could break me by attacking my garden, my sanctuary. They thought they understood what I valued. They had no idea. The roses were important, yes. But Sarah, Owen, and Lily were my very blood. My roots. And just like the tenacious roses, I would not be destroyed. I would simply go dormant for a while, gathering strength beneath the harsh winter ground, only to bloom again, sharper and more resilient than ever. I took a picture of my ravaged garden, a silent promise to myself. This was no longer just about justice for Sarah. This was a personal war. And I had just received their declaration. Mark Sterling and his powerful family had poked a sleeping bear, believing it to be a harmless old lady. They were about to discover the difference. My search for shadows had just become a hunt. And I had a very old, very effective hunter by my side. The destruction of my rose garden solidified something crucial within me. The lingering thread of doubt, the temptation to retreat, to somehow make peace with the Sterlings for the sake of a quiet life, it snapped. They had crossed a line. My sanctuary had been violated, a clear message sent. But it wasn't fear they instilled, it was an even deeper resolve. They wanted a fight? They would get one. Mark's legal team, as expected, soon made their move. A formal letter arrived, heavy with legal jargon, stating Mark Sterling was initiating proceedings for marital separation, primary custody of the minor children, and immediate return of property currently withheld by Mrs. Sarah Vance Sterling. It painted Sarah as an unstable parent influenced by an elderly, meddlesome relative, implying I was senile or manipulative. The sheer audacity of it, the twisting of truth, made my stomach clench. Sarah, reading it, sank back into despair. He's doing it, Mom. He's going to take them. Not if we fight back, I insisted, my voice firm. And we will. I met Artie at a nondescript diner a few towns over, choosing a booth in the furthest corner, away from prying eyes. The clatter of plates and the murmur of conversations provided a strange kind of cover. He pushed a manila folder across the table to me. Mark Sterling, Artie began, his voice low, is very good at what he does. Which is making trouble disappear. But not everything. Not for someone who knows where to look. Inside the folder were snippets of information, compiled with Artie's characteristic thoroughness. There was a brief mention of a personal leave of absence taken by Mark during his college years, after a disciplinary incident that was quickly expunged from his record. Too clean, Artie observed. Rich kid, minor scuffle, daddy makes a call. Happens all the time. but the official record states he volunteered for an overseas humanitarian project. My source says it was actually a mandatory anger management program, and the incident involved a violent altercation with a girlfriend who subsequently dropped out of school and left the state, never to be heard from again. The girlfriend's name, Evelyn Rhodes, was written in Artie's neat hand. Then there were the business dealings. Mark's real estate empire had grown rapidly, almost too rapidly. Artie had uncovered a pattern of aggressive acquisitions, often involving properties in economically disadvantaged areas, where local landowners were pressured into selling at below market rates. Nothing explicitly illegal on the surface, Artie admitted, but a lot of accidental fires in buildings he wanted to acquire, or sudden rezoning approvals that mysteriously fast-tracked his projects. And always a public official who suddenly resigned or retired right after. He leaves no fingerprints, I mused, my mind whirring, connecting the dots. Just unfortunate coincidences. Exactly, Artie said, a grim smile on his face. Which means we can't go to the police with this. It's all circumstantial. But it paints a picture, Ilara. A picture of a man who uses intimidation and coercion to get what he wants. A man who controls narratives. Sound familiar? It did. It sounded exactly like the man who had systematically dismantled my daughter's self-worth. My own investigation continued. I used my seemingly harmless demeanor to my advantage. Dressed in my best, but still unassuming, clothes, I attended a charity gala Mark was hosting, a glittering affair where the city's elite mingled. No one paid any mind to the elderly woman quietly sipping sparkling water in a corner, watching. I saw Mark in his element, radiating charm, effortlessly commanding attention. I watched how he interacted with his parents, their pride almost palpable. I also noticed the subtle, deferential way many people treated him, a quiet fear beneath their smiles. I listened to snippets of conversation, piecing together a mosaic of his reputation. Mark's a visionary, one woman gushed. So decisive, another added. A true family man, an elderly gentleman declared, completely oblivious to the bitter irony of his words. I felt a profound exhaustion, a weariness that went beyond the physical. The world seemed to be conspiring against us, its admiration for Mark an almost insurmountable wall. Doubt, a venomous serpent, began to coil in my heart. Was I truly capable of this? Was I deluding myself into thinking I could dismantle such a powerful, entrenched system? Could I truly protect Sarah and the children, or was I just dragging them into a deeper, more dangerous abyss? That night, as I watched Sarah sleep, a single tear escaped, tracing a path down my cheek. I was old. I was tired. And Mark Sterling was a formidable opponent. But then, I thought of Sarah's bruised face, of Lily's tear-filled eyes, of Owen's silent fear. I thought of Evelyn Rhodes, a name lost to time, a life perhaps irrevocably altered by Mark's cruelty. The doubt retreated, replaced by a cold, burning resolve. I was an old woman, yes. But I had a lifetime of quiet observation, of reading human nature, of understanding the subtle interplay of power and manipulation. And I had Artie. My phone buzzed. It was Artie. Ilara, he said, his voice unusually excited. I think I found something. A property acquisition in downtown Elmwood, about 10 years ago. Mark Sterling bought up several old businesses, then almost immediately got approval for a massive redevelopment. But there was one holdout. An old family bookstore, passed down through generations. The owner refused to sell. Said Mark used aggressive tactics. Then, suddenly, the bookstore owner packed up, left town, and the property was sold just below market value to a shell corporation, which then flipped it to Sterling Realty for a huge profit. The owner's name was Clara Morgan. And she still lives in town. A name. A face. A possible witness, a woman who had experienced Mark Sterling's predatory methods firsthand. This wasn't just a financial detail, it was a potential crack in his armor, a human story of his ruthlessness. It was a lead. My first real breakthrough. The serpent of doubt was banished. In its place, a familiar, steely determination, honed over a lifetime of quiet battles, now took root. The game was still dangerous, but now, I had a piece to play. And I would play it with every ounce of cunning and strength I possessed. The search for shadows had yielded its first tangible result. Now, it was time to step out of the shadows, and gently, very gently, begin to tug at the thin, carefully woven web of lies. The name Clara Morgan resonated with a quiet urgency. She wasn't just a victim of Mark's predatory business practices, she was a survivor. And survivors, I knew, held keys to untold stories. Artie had managed to track her down to a small apartment above what was now a trendy coffee shop, ironically, just a few blocks from the original location of her family bookstore that Mark had eventually acquired. The irony wasn't lost on me. I decided to approach Clara alone, reasoning that an elderly woman seeking to chat would be less intimidating than a former detective. I found her on a brisk January afternoon, arranging books in a small, independent bookstore she now volunteered at, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her movements precise and careful. She looked tired, her eyes holding a deep sadness, but there was also a quiet resilience about her. "Ms. Morgan?" I asked gently, my voice soft. "My name is Alara Vance. I hope you'll forgive my intrusion, but I believe we have a mutual acquaintance." She looked at me, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. "Oh? And who might that be?" "Mark Sterling," I said, watching her face carefully. At the mention of his name, her composure wavered, a flash of pain and anger crossing her features before she quickly masked it. "I don't know anyone by that name anymore," she stated, her voice tight, turning back to the shelf. It was a clear dismissal, a wall built from years of pain and perhaps fear. "I understand," I continued, undeterred. "He took your bookstore, didn't he? Your family's legacy. He also took my daughter's spirit. And he's trying to take her children now." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "My daughter's name is Sarah Vance Sterling." Clara froze. She slowly turned, her eyes wide with recognition, then a dawning horror. "Sarah. Sarah Sterling? Is she okay? I haven't seen her in years." She stopped returning my calls. Her voice was laced with a genuine concern that surprised me. This was it. A connection. Sarah had mentioned a friend, Clara, who had inexplicably drifted away after her marriage to Mark. Another one of his subtle acts of isolation. We sat in a quiet corner of the bookstore, surrounded by the comforting scent of paper and ink. As I told her Sarah's story, the abuse, the manipulation, the Christmas Eve horror, Clara listened intently, her own story slowly unfolding in unspoken nods and silent tears. She recounted how Mark had relentlessly pursued her property, using legal loopholes, vague threats, and eventually, pure financial muscle to force her out. "He crushed me," she whispered, her voice raw. "He didn't care about the history, about the community. Just the profit. He warned me to keep quiet, to never speak ill of him or his family, or he'd make sure my life was very difficult. I couldn't fight him anymore. I was alone." Her words were a mirror image of Sarah's experience, a chilling testament to Mark's modus operandi. But seeing Sarah's pain, hearing my plea, ignited something in Clara. I want to help," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I don't know what I can do, but he can't keep getting away with this." Clara became our first hesitant ally, a vital piece in the puzzle. She provided not only her testimony of Mark's ruthlessness but also subtle insights into the Sterling family's influence. She revealed that Liam Sterling, Mark's father, had personally made a few courtesy calls to the local zoning board and even the police chief during her bookstore ordeal, all perfectly legal, of course, but heavily weighted with the implicit threat of his power. Back at my home, the atmosphere was still strained. Sarah was a ghost, consumed by worry over the legal letters from Mark's lawyers. Owen and Lily felt the tension acutely. Owen had grown quiet and watchful, while Lily often woke with nightmares, calling for her mother. I tried to shield them, but the fear was pervasive. Then, a new layer of Mark's control began to unravel. Artie, with his access to financial databases, discovered that Mark had meticulously structured their finances, leaving Sarah with virtually no independent assets. Every joint account was heavily weighted in his favor, every investment tied to his name. Sarah had been granted a generous allowance, but only with his approval, effectively making her a gilded prisoner. Even her previously substantial inheritance from her own father had been, over time, pooled into joint accounts under Mark's management, making it incredibly difficult to access without his consent. He drained her. I fumed to Artie over the phone, my voice tight with anger. He systematically stripped her of her financial independence, just as he stripped her of her self-worth. Classic abuser playbook, Ilara, Artie responded grimly. Makes them completely reliant. Impossible to leave without facing destitution. And then he uses the kids as leverage. The discovery brought a new wave of despair to Sarah. I have nothing, Mom. Nothing of my own. How will I ever support the children? He'll make sure I get nothing in a divorce. He controls everything. My anger, however, turned into cold resolve. He may control the money, Sarah, but he doesn't control the truth. And truth, eventually, has its own currency. I spent hours on my computer, delving into public records of Mark's business dealings, cross-referencing Artie's findings. I found more of those unfortunate coincidences, properties bought cheaply, suddenly gaining immense value after inexplicable rezoning or permits, all under the Sterling name. It was a pattern, clear and undeniable, if you knew how to look. It wasn't just about Clara Morgan, it was about dozens of smaller Clara Morgans, whose stories had been swallowed by Mark's ambition. But the most chilling discovery came from an old, local newspaper archive Artie dug up. A small, almost forgotten article from a decade ago, detailing a tragic fire at an old apartment building in a rundown part of town. The building, slated for redevelopment by a then up-and-coming Mark Sterling, had been occupied by several low-income families who were refusing to relocate. The fire had been ruled accidental, origin unknown. No one had been seriously hurt, but the families had been left homeless, effectively forcing them to sell their leases to Mark for pennies on the dollar. The timing was too perfect, the outcome too convenient. It was a ghost, lurking in the margins of Mark's spotless record, a dark stain on his carefully constructed image. This wasn't just about financial ruthlessness. This was about potential, unspoken criminality. The more I uncovered, the more the magnitude of our task became clear. We weren't just fighting an abusive husband, we were fighting a man who had built an empire on manipulation, coercion, and potentially, far darker acts. He was protected by layers of influence, money, and fear. But I was Ilara Vance. I had faced down literary critics, rowdy students, and the quiet despair of widowhood. I had nurtured delicate roses and kept watch over ancient stories. And now, I would unravel the secrets of the past, awaken the ghosts of the present, and expose the man who had brought a bruise to my daughter's face and tears to my grandchildren's eyes. The quiet observer was now a seeker of truth, ready to dig as deep as necessary, no matter how dark the shadows, no matter how chilling the secrets. We had our first ally, our first leads. The hunt was truly on. The fragile peace in my home was shattered by the escalating threats from the Sterlings. The anonymous phone calls became more frequent, always silent, always unsettling. The dark sedan I'd occasionally spotted near my house now seemed to make regular passes, a cold, watchful presence. The message was clear, they knew where we were, and they were watching. Then came the physical escalation. One morning, Sarah came downstairs, her face pale. "Mom," she whispered, "my car. The tires are slashed." We rushed outside to find all 4 tires of her car, still parked in my driveway, methodically deflated, ripped open with brutal precision. It wasn't just a flat tire, it was an act of deliberate malice, a blatant warning. My sanctuary was no longer untouched. My quiet street, usually safe and sleepy, felt violated. "He wants to cut off our escape," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "To make us feel trapped. He does this. Makes you feel like there's nowhere to go." My anger flared, cold and sharp. This was psychological warfare, designed to erode our resolve, to push Sarah back into his manipulative embrace. But it only strengthened my own. They were resorting to petty vandalism because they couldn't get to us directly. It meant we were getting under their skin. Even more heartbreaking was the effect on Owen and Lily. The initial shock had given way to a deep, unsettling sadness. Lily missed her father, the fun Mark, the one who bought her lavish gifts and took her on exciting trips. She started asking, "When are we going home, Grandma?" "Daddy said he misses me. He said we're going to Disneyland after Christmas." Her innocent questions were like tiny knives in my heart, each one a testament to Mark's manipulative charm. Owen, on the other hand, was withdrawn, his brow often furrowed in thought. He'd overheard the hushed conversations, seen his mother's bruised face, witnessed the slashing of the tires. He was old enough to understand that something profoundly wrong was happening, but young enough to be terrified by it. He missed his friends, his school, the comfortable routine of his life, however deceptive it might have been. Mark, ever the master manipulator, used video calls to plant seeds of doubt, promising extravagant things, appealing to their longing for normalcy. "It's just a misunderstanding, kids. Your mommy and grandma are upset. But we're a family. We belong together." He made himself the victim, the benevolent father simply wanting his children back. It was infuriating. "We need proof, Mom," Sarah said one evening, a rare spark of determination in her eyes. "Something undeniable. Something that can't be twisted." The conversation with Clara, and my continued efforts, had begun to chip away at her fear, replacing it with a slow, simmering anger. My investigation with Artie was yielding more fragmented, yet disturbing, pieces. Artie had used his contacts to dig deeper into Mark's financial history. He'd found a series of shell corporations, complex offshore accounts, and a convoluted web of transactions that screamed money laundering or tax evasion. Nothing direct linked to the abuse, but it painted a picture of a man who operated far outside the lines of conventional legality. "This is big, Yalara," Artie warned me over a scrambled phone line. "Much bigger than just a few shady real estate deals. If we can link Mark to something definitively illegal, the feds might get involved. That's a whole different ballgame from a domestic dispute. But it's incredibly complex. And dangerous. He'll fight dirty to protect his money. And his freedom." I knew the risks. But the image of Sarah's bruised face, and the terrified eyes of my grandchildren, spurred me on. The cost of inaction was far greater than any personal danger. One chilly afternoon, a heavy parcel arrived at my doorstep, left anonymously. Inside, nestled amongst crumpled newspaper, was a dead rose, identical to the ones I'd nurtured in my garden, its petals crushed and brittle. Tucked beside it was a printed photo, a grainy, long-lens shot of Owen and Lily walking home from school, taken from a distance, their faces clear. No note, no message, just the implied threat, "We can get to your grandchildren." My breath caught in my throat. This was no longer just about me, or even Sarah. This was about Owen and Lily. My grandchildren. They were using them as leverage. The cold rage that had become my constant companion flared into an inferno. I immediately called Artie, my voice tight with a fury I rarely allowed myself. They sent a message. A dead rose. And a photo of Owen and Lily walking home from school. Artie was silent for a moment. "That's a new level, Ilara. We need to be extremely careful. Do you have security? Cameras?" "No," I admitted, my quiet life never having necessitated such things. "But I will. Tonight." That evening, as I nervously installed the basic security cameras Artie rushed over to me, I made a decision. Mark Sterling, with his impeccable public persona, his vast wealth, and his powerful family, believed he was invincible. He believed he could operate in the shadows, destroying lives, while maintaining his gleaming facade. But I knew a thing or two about shadows. And I knew how to find the light switch. Artie's deep dive into Mark's finances had also uncovered something tantalizing: an off-the-books property, a secluded cabin tucked away in a remote corner of the state, registered under a series of interlocking shell companies. It was a place where Mark would occasionally escape from the pressures of his life, usually alone, sometimes with business associates. It was a secret bolt hole, unknown even to Evelyn and Liam. Why so secret? I asked Artie. Could be anything, he mused. Tax evasion. A place to store undeclared assets. Or, a place to conduct business he doesn't want anyone else to know about. A place where the coincidences stop being coincidences and become confessions. A dark idea began to form in my mind, dangerous and terrifying. If we couldn't get Mark to confess to abusing Sarah, if the police wouldn't move without undeniable proof, then perhaps we could expose him through another, equally damaging vulnerability. His criminal activities. If he was caught red-handed, his reputation, his power, his entire empire would crumble. And then, Sarah and the children would truly be free. It was a risky, desperate gamble. It would involve venturing into his world, into his shadows, and confronting him on his own turf. But the thought of that dead rose, the image of my grandchildren's faces, hardened my resolve. This wasn't just about justice. This was about survival. And sometimes, to survive, you had to venture into the heart of the storm. I looked at the security cameras, blinking red lights in the darkness, and knew that the next move, perilous as it might be, had to be ours. It was time to hunt in the deep shadows. It was time to find his secret. The dead rose and the photo of my grandchildren were a declaration of war. No longer could I simply observe, gather, and plan from a safe distance. Mark had struck at the very core of my being, at the innocence I was fighting to protect. The game had escalated, and I needed to meet his aggression with calculated, precise retaliation. My first priority was the children's safety. With Artie's help, I upgraded my home security. Hidden cameras were placed around the perimeter, motion sensor lights installed. Artie even gave me a personal panic button, a small device linked directly to his phone. It felt like overkill for my quiet suburban home, but the fear for Owen and Lily was a constant, sharp prick. I also made sure they were never alone, always accompanied by either Sarah or me, even for short walks. The discovery of Mark's secret cabin, his off-the-books retreat, became the focal point of our strategy. If that place existed outside the Sterling family's oversight, outside of public knowledge, it might contain the evidence we so desperately needed. It was his blind spot, his weak underbelly. "We need to get inside that cabin, Elara," Artie stated, his voice grim. "But it's likely secured. And if he finds us there, it could be very, very bad." I knew the risks. My heart pounded at the thought, but my resolve remained unshaken. "I'll go," I said, surprising even myself with my immediate certainty. He'd never suspect me. An old woman, perhaps lost, perhaps needing help. No one would question it. My seemingly harmless demeanor was my greatest weapon. While Artie worked on pinpointing the cabin's exact location and possible security measures, I began a new phase of my personal campaign, a subtle, psychological offensive against Mark. It was a game of cat and mouse, played out in plain sight, using the very social circles he so meticulously cultivated. My first opportunity came at a local art exhibition, an event where the Sterling family was always prominently featured. I knew Mark and Evelyn would be there. I arrived early, my silver hair impeccably styled, dressed in a simple but elegant suit. I looked every inch the respectable, if slightly out of place, retired teacher. I found Evelyn Sterling by a particularly abstract sculpture, surrounded by a small retinue of admiring acquaintances. Her posture was regal, her smile fixed. "Evelyn," I said, my voice sweet and even, approaching her directly. "What a pleasure to see you. Such stimulating art." She turned, her eyes narrowing as she recognized me. Her fixed smile faltered, replaced by a tight, wary expression. Ilara. What a surprise. I hadn't expected to see you here. Her tone was frosty, laced with barely concealed disdain. Oh, I do enjoy a good exhibit, I replied, feigning innocence. It's so important to support the arts, don't you think? Especially with all the turbulence in the world. It reminds us of beauty, of truth. I allowed my gaze to linger on her for a moment, letting the double meaning hang in the air. She bristled. Indeed. Though some people prefer to create their own turbulence, rather than appreciate the peace. It was a thinly veiled jab, meant to cut. Perhaps, I countered, still smiling serenely. Or perhaps they are simply exposing the turbulence that was already there, hidden beneath a very pretty facade. I shifted my gaze slightly, as if admiring the sculpture, but my words were for her alone. It's fascinating, isn't it, how easily things can be broken? A reputation, a family, a life. But sometimes, when things are broken, the truth underneath becomes visible. And that can be a very powerful thing. Her eyes blazed. Her public smile was now a grimace. You continue to meddle, Ilara. You continue to poison my son's family. You will regret this. Her voice was a low, dangerous whisper, meant only for me. And you, Evelyn, I replied, my smile unwavering, though my heart beat a little faster, will regret underestimating a quiet old woman. Sometimes, the most unexpected storms come from the calmest waters. I excused myself gracefully, leaving her seething, her circle of admirers looking on with barely concealed curiosity. It was a small victory, a subtle jab, but I had made her uncomfortable. I had shown her that I was not afraid. Meanwhile, Artie's progress was slow but steady. He used satellite imagery and old hunting maps to finally pinpoint the cabin's location, deep in a dense forest, accessible by a long, unpaved road. He also discovered that Mark visited it irregularly, typically once every 2 or 3 months, usually for a solitary weekend. Our window of opportunity would be narrow. The pressure mounted on Sarah. Mark's lawyers served official papers demanding she return the children for supervised visitation with their father, threatening immediate legal action if she refused. Sarah was on the brink of breaking. Mom, I can't put them through a custody battle. He'll drag us through the mud. It will destroy them. He wants you to believe that, darling, I said, holding her close. He wants you to surrender. But we have to fight. And we have an advantage he doesn't know about. I showed her the map, the pinpointed location of the cabin. This is where we find his weakness. This is where we break him. Seeing my unwavering determination, and the tangible lead we now had, a flicker of Sarah's old spirit re-emerged. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice still quiet, but now imbued with a fragile strength. I looked at her, truly seeing my daughter again. The fear was still there, but beneath it, a steel was beginning to form, tempered by adversity. I need you to be strong, Sarah. For the children. I need you to trust me. And I need you to be ready to tell your story, the whole truth, when the time comes. Our plan began to coalesce, daring and dangerous. We would time my visit to the cabin with one of Mark's expected solitary trips. I would discover something there, something that would be undeniable proof of his illegal activities. And then, we would use it. It was a high-stakes gamble, a foray into the lion's den. But the lion had already attacked my cub, and threatened my pack. And this old lioness, though outwardly frail, was ready to bare her teeth. The game of cat and mouse was about to reach its terrifying climax. The days leading up to Mark's next scheduled visit to the secluded cabin were a crucible of nerves and meticulous planning. Artie, with his vast network and experience, worked tirelessly. He installed a GPS tracker on Mark's car, a discreet device that would alert us when he left for the cabin. He also acquired a set of professional lockpicking tools and a small, high-definition camera designed for covert recording. The moral lines were blurring, but the stakes were too high for conventional ethics. I had to become the wolf, even if it meant shedding the sheep's clothing. During this tense period, an unexpected turn came from Detective Harper. He called me, requesting a meeting. I met him at a quiet park bench, miles from my home, away from any potential surveillance. He looked weary, his usually sharp eyes clouded with frustration. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice low, "I need to tell you something, off the record. The Sterlings are putting immense pressure on my department. Demanding action against you for parental abduction, threatening to go to the DA, threatening my superiors. They've even implied certain irregularities in my own recent cases." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's all baseless, of course, but it's enough to make my life hell. They're very good at creating problems for anyone who stands in their way." My heart sank. Their influence was even more pervasive than I'd thought. "So you can't help us?" He shook his head, looking genuinely apologetic. "Not officially. Not yet. But," he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "I've been doing some unofficial digging. The paperwork on Mrs. Van Sterling's car, the tire slashing incident? It was done by someone known to the department. A low-level enforcer, known for intimidation services, with ties to a few unsavory real estate developers. Nothing direct to Mark Sterling, of course. But the pattern, it's there. And that old fire in Elmwood, the one from 10 years ago? The accidental ruling always felt a little off to me." He looked at me, a flicker of respect, perhaps even admiration, in his gaze. "You've got a real fight on your hands, Mrs. Vance. And you're doing something truly courageous. I can't help you directly without solid, undeniable evidence against Mark Sterling. Something concrete. But, if you were to find something that couldn't be ignored by even the highest echelons of this city, you could come to me. And I'd make sure it got to the right people. People above the Sterling's reach." He handed me a small, unmarked piece of paper with a phone number on it. "My private line. Use it only when you have something utterly damning." It was a risky, almost reckless offer. A police detective, subtly breaking protocol, hinting at a willingness to help if I could deliver the unassailable proof. It felt like a lifeline, but one threaded through a minefield. Harper was an unexpected ally, a testament to the raw truth of Sarah's pain and my desperate resolve. He believed us, even if he couldn't openly act. This was a crucial piece. The next challenge was the trap. My plan was to set up a confrontation with Mark at his cabin. But I couldn't simply burst in and hope he'd confess. He was too cunning for that. I needed to lure him, to provoke him into revealing his true nature and his secrets, while ensuring it was all recorded. "I need something to bait him, Artie," I explained. "Something that will make him panic, that will make him drop his guard." Artie, ever resourceful, had a solution. He had carefully extracted a single, meticulously hidden flash drive from Sarah's old laptop, a drive she had forgotten about, buried deep in a folder labeled Old Photos. It contained not photos, but a series of cryptic financial documents she had once stumbled upon years ago, thinking them unimportant, and a handful of veiled emails between Mark and an unknown associate discussing property adjustments and cash disbursements. On their own, they were inconclusive. But if placed in the right hands, they could hint at the money laundering and illicit deals Artie had been tracking. "These aren't enough to convict him," Artie clarified, holding up the flash drive. "But they're enough to scare him. To make him think his hidden empire is about to be exposed. Enough to make him desperate." My plan began to solidify, horrifying in its simplicity and danger. I would go to the cabin, armed with Artie's lockpicking skills and the hidden camera. I would find whatever secrets the cabin held. Then, I would leave behind a carefully selected breadcrumb, a copy of that flash drive, perhaps, or a subtle message, indicating that his secret financial dealings were known. I would make it seem like I had accessed his sensitive information. And then, I would call him. I would tell him I had found something. Something that compromised him. Something that proved his true nature, not just as an abuser, but as a criminal. I would tell him I was going to expose it all. I would demand a meeting, setting the stage for his panicked reaction. I would push him to the edge, force him to drop his charming facade, and expose the monster beneath. And then, I would record it. Every word. Every threat. Every confession. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. It was a perilous dance, a direct confrontation with a man who was violent, manipulative, and desperate. But there was no other way. Sarah's healing, the children's future, depended on this one audacious gamble. I looked at Sarah, her face still bearing the faint bruise, but her eyes now held a flicker of newfound courage. She had read Clara Morgan's full statement, listened to Artie's grim assessment of Mark's financial crimes. The knowledge had replaced her fear with a quiet, burning indignation. "I'm ready, Mom," she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. "Whatever you need. I'll stand with you. We'll finally end this." Her words were a balm to my weary soul, a confirmation that I wasn't alone in this terrifying quest. The old, quiet life was a distant memory. I was no longer a Lara Vance, the retired teacher. I was a strategist, a hunter, a protector. And the trap was set. The cat was about to reveal its claws, and the mouse, though small, was ready to fight. The call from Artie came on a Tuesday morning, crisp and precise. "He's on the move, Ilara. Left his office an hour ago. GPS indicates he's heading north, towards the cabin. You have approximately 3 hours before he arrives." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum. This was it. The culmination of weeks of fear, planning, and hidden battles. I looked at Sarah, who gripped my hand, her face pale but determined. "Be careful, Mom," she whispered. "Please." "I will," I promised, pressing her hand reassuringly. I slipped Artie's covert camera into my purse, a tiny device that felt impossibly heavy. The small, worn leather bag also contained the lock-picking tools, the bait flash drive, and Harper's private number, scribbled on a piece of paper, my last resort. The drive was tense, the winter landscape blurring past my car window. I reviewed the plan in my head, every step, every contingency. Artie had given me detailed instructions on the cabin's layout, its likely security vulnerabilities. He would monitor my GPS and wait for my signal, ready to call Harper if anything went wrong. The unpaved road leading to the cabin was winding and desolate, shaded by towering pines. The seclusion was unsettling, a perfect backdrop for illicit activities. The cabin itself was a rustic structure, seemingly benign, but its isolation felt sinister. My old sedan, inconspicuous as it was, stood out in this wilderness. I parked it deep in the woods, out of sight from the main approach. I approached the cabin, my senses heightened. The air was still, cold, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. No sound but the crunch of snow under my boots, the frantic beat of my own heart. Artie's instructions proved invaluable. The cabin had an alarm system, but an older model, with a specific blind spot he'd identified. With trembling but surprisingly steady hands, I managed to disable a small exterior sensor, creating a temporary opening. Then, using the lock-picking tools Artie had provided, I worked on the back door. It took several agonizing minutes, my breath fogging in the cold air, but then, with a soft click, the lock gave way. I slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind me, plunging the cabin into a heavy, dusty gloom. The air was stale, cold. I pulled out my small flashlight and Artie's camera, switching it to recording mode, its tiny red light blinking almost imperceptibly. The interior was sparsely furnished, utilitarian. A worn couch, a crude wooden table, a small fireplace. But it was the back room that Artie had flagged. It was locked, secured with a heavy deadbolt. This was where Mark kept his secrets. Another agonizing session with the lockpick. My fingers were stiff with cold and nerves, but the years of gardening had given them a surprising dexterity. Finally, with another soft click, the door swung open. The air in the back room was even colder, heavy with the scent of old paper and something metallic, almost chemical. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing shelves lined with stacks of ledgers, old computers, and several locked metal filing cabinets. This was it. His clandestine office. His nerve center. I worked quickly, methodically. The filing cabinets were secured with cheap locks, easily picked. Inside, I found what Artie had suspected: meticulous records of offshore accounts, shell companies, laundered money, and detailed plans for land acquisitions that involved coercion and veiled threats. But it was in one of the old computers, powered up with a surge protector I found, that I discovered the true horror. Encrypted files, cleverly hidden, containing incriminating voice recordings and detailed, almost obsessive, records of his psychological and financial manipulations of Sarah, even diagrams of how to handle her emotional outbursts. There were also files on Evelyn Rhodes, the vanished girlfriend, and detailed notes on how the Elmwood fire incident had been managed. Mark hadn't just gotten away with it, he had documented his escape, meticulously, almost proudly. He was a narcissist, incapable of believing he could truly be caught. I downloaded a selection of these files onto the Bait flash drive, enough to be utterly damning. My heart was pounding, a visceral mixture of terror and triumphant disgust. The man was a monster, far worse than I had imagined. I heard the distinct crunch of tires on the gravel road outside. He was here. Panic flared, sharp and cold. I quickly relocked the filing cabinet, shut down the computer, and closed the back room door, leaving the Bait flash drive prominently displayed on the rustic table in the main room, almost as if it had been accidentally dropped by a previous visitor. Then, I scrambled, trying to find a hiding spot. There was a small, narrow closet, barely large enough to conceal my slender frame. I squeezed in, pulling the door almost completely shut, leaving only a sliver to observe. I activated the camera's remote recording, placing it on a high shelf, angled to capture the main room and the entrance to the secret office. The front door opened. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of expensive cologne. Mark Sterling walked into the cabin, a tall, imposing shadow against the dim light. He looked around, his eyes scanning the room, a possessive, almost predatory look on his face. He shed his coat, tossing it carelessly over a chair. He didn't notice the disarmed alarm sensor. He didn't notice the subtle shift in the lock on the back door of his secret office. But he did notice the flash drive, glinting on the table. He picked it up, a puzzled frown on his face. He plugged it into his laptop, which he'd just taken from his briefcase. His fingers flew across the keyboard. As the files loaded, his face, visible from my vantage point, slowly transformed. The initial puzzlement gave way to a dawning horror, then a cold, venomous fury. His breathing became heavy, ragged. He slammed the laptop shut. He saw the camera then, or rather, he felt its presence. His eyes narrowed, searching. He strode over, found it, and ripped it down, crushing it in his fist. But it was too late. It had recorded him. It had recorded his reaction, his sudden shift from polished charm to raw, uncontrolled rage. Then, he reached for his phone. I knew what I had to do. This was my moment. I stepped out of the closet, my legs trembling, but my voice, when it came, was steady and clear. Looking for something, Mark? He spun around, his eyes blazing, a snarl twisting his handsome features. The mask was completely gone, revealing the true monster underneath. You meddling old hag. How dare you? How did you find this place? His voice was a dangerous growl, low and menacing. I found it, I replied, my voice unwavering, because you left a trail of broken lives and shattered trusts. And because you underestimated a quiet old woman. He lunged towards me, his hand outstretched, a terrifying fury in his eyes. You have no idea what you've done, Alara. You think you can walk into my life, disrupt everything, and get away with it? You think you can expose me? He grabbed my arm, his grip bruising, his face inches from mine, spittle flying as he raged. I'll bury you. I'll bury you and Sarah and those brats so deep no one will ever find you. I'll make sure you regret the day you ever interfered. He shook me, his grip tightening, his eyes burning with a murderous intent. The fear was immense, suffocating. But I held his gaze, refusing to break. I knew this was it. This was the raw, unvarnished truth. This was the proof. You're finished, Mark, I said, my voice barely a whisper, but filled with a conviction that came from the depths of my soul. It's over. Just then, the distant wail of sirens pierced the silence of the forest, growing rapidly louder. Artie. He had seen enough on my GPS, or perhaps heard the initial confrontation. He had called Detective Harper. Mark froze, his head snapping towards the sound, his face contorting into a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated panic. He released me, stumbling backward, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. The sirens grew deafening. Headlights cut through the trees. The front door burst open, and Detective Harper, along with 2 uniformed officers, stormed in, guns drawn. Mark Sterling, the impeccable businessman, the pillar of the community, stood in the center of his secret, illicit lair, his face pale and contorted with rage and terror, surrounded by the undeniable evidence of his dark empire. The trap had closed. And the beast, finally exposed, was caught. The cabin became a scene of controlled chaos. Uniformed officers meticulously secured the area, while Detective Harper, his face grim but relieved, took charge. Mark Sterling, sputtering with indignation and threats, was cuffed and led away, his protests echoing through the silent woods. He tried to maintain his composure, his air of wronged innocence, but the mask had shattered, revealing only raw, desperate fury. "You'll regret this, Vance," he shrieked at me as they escorted him out. "This isn't over. My lawyers will tear you apart." I met his gaze, my own eyes holding a calm, cold certainty. "It is over, Mark. For you." Harper found my crushed camera, and though the device itself was destroyed, the tiny memory card was intact. He also found the bait flash drive, still in Mark's laptop. As other officers began cataloging the stacks of ledgers, the offshore account details, and the old computer files in the hidden back room, the sheer scale of Mark's illicit operations became terrifyingly clear. Money laundering, fraudulent real estate schemes, even hints of blackmail against minor public officials, a veritable empire built on deceit. Artie arrived shortly after, his face creased with concern as he took in the scene. He clapped me on the shoulder, his grip firm. "You did good, Ilara. Very good. Reckless, but good." I called Sarah, my voice thick with emotion, telling her Mark had been arrested. A wave of relief, so profound it bordered on pain, washed over her. She wept, long, cleansing sobs, finally letting go of the years of terror. "It's over, Mom," she repeated, almost to herself. "It's really over." The aftermath was a whirlwind. News of Mark Sterling's arrest exploded across the local media, sending shockwaves through the community. The impeccable image of the successful businessman crumbled under the weight of mounting evidence. The Sterling family, caught completely off guard, initially tried to use their influence, but the evidence gathered at the cabin was too overwhelming, too meticulously documented. With the FBI now involved, thanks to Detective Harper's swift and decisive action, the local political pressures quickly dissipated. The courtroom drama that followed was brutal, a public spectacle that laid bare the dark underbelly of a seemingly perfect life. Sarah, initially terrified, found an astonishing reserve of strength. She had seen the evidence, heard the recordings of Mark's rage, read his chillingly detailed notes on how to manipulate her. The truth had finally set her free from his psychological grip. She took the stand, her voice clear and unwavering, despite the obvious fear in her eyes. She recounted years of emotional abuse, financial control, and physical violence, her testimony painting a vivid, horrifying picture of Mark Sterling's true character. Liam Sterling, Mark's father, sat stone-faced in the gallery, his once powerful legal mind unable to find a single crack in Sarah's honest account. Evelyn Sterling wept theatrically, but her crocodile tears did little to sway the jury. My testimony followed, detailing my discovery of Sarah's bruise, my confrontation with Mark, and my subsequent investigation that led me to the cabin. The defense tried to paint me as a meddling, vindictive old woman, manipulating my daughter, but my calm demeanor and the irrefutable evidence from the cabin undercut their attempts. Clara Morgan, my first ally, also testified, bravely detailing Mark's ruthless tactics in acquiring her bookstore, her testimony bolstering the pattern of his predatory behavior. Even Evelyn Rhodes, the vanished college girlfriend, now living under a different name, was located by the FBI and, after much convincing, provided a powerful, albeit tearful, statement corroborating Mark's violent tendencies in his youth. The trial lasted weeks, each day a grueling battle. Mark, surprisingly, decided to take the stand, clinging to his narcissism, trying to charm the jury, to paint himself as a victim of a vengeful wife and her unhinged mother. But his carefully constructed facade finally cracked under cross-examination. Pressed on the incriminating documents, confronted with Sarah's raw testimony, he finally exploded, echoing the same violent threats he'd made to me in the cabin, confirming his true nature for all to see. The jury visibly recoiled. The verdict, when it came, was swift and unanimous. Mark Sterling was found guilty on multiple counts of financial fraud, money laundering, and assault. The judge, clearly appalled by the depth of his deception and cruelty, handed down a severe sentence. As the judge delivered the sentence, I looked at Sarah. Her face was streaked with tears, but they were tears of release, not despair. She caught my eye and offered a small, weary smile. It was over. The monster was caged. The legal victory brought a profound sense of justice, but it wasn't a happy ending in the traditional sense. The scars on Sarah's psyche would take years to heal. Owen and Lily, though relieved their father was gone, grappled with the complex emotions of seeing their once heroic dad revealed as a villain. It was a messy, painful reality, but it was their reality, and they faced it together, no longer hidden beneath a blanket of lies. After the trial, Detective Harper approached me. "Mrs. Vance," he said, extending his hand, "thank you. You risked everything. You showed immense courage. You opened my eyes to a darkness I almost missed." He paused. "And I think you taught me a thing or two about what true justice sometimes requires." I simply nodded, accepting his gratitude. My quiet life had been irrevocably altered. I was no longer just the retired teacher. I was a fighter, a protector, a woman who had dared to challenge an empire and emerged victorious, albeit bruised. The fight had taken its toll, but it had also forged something new within me, a profound understanding of my own strength. The consequences of Mark's actions would ripple for years, but now, finally, the tide had turned. And we, the quiet, the underestimated, were finally free to rebuild. Months turned into a year. The winter snows had melted, giving way to a hesitant spring, and now, the full bloom of summer. My rose garden, once savagely defiled, had been painstakingly restored. The new growth was stronger, more resilient, a living testament to healing and perseverance. So too was my family. The immediate aftermath of the trial was fraught with difficulty. Sarah had to navigate the emotional labyrinth of divorce, unraveling Mark's financial web, and slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding her life. The Sterling family, disgraced and diminished, retreated from public life, their once unshakable influence fractured. Liam and Evelyn were nowhere to be seen, their empire now a shadow of its former glory. Sarah moved back into her old house, taking Owen and Lily with her. It was a daunting task, reclaiming a space filled with so many painful memories. But this time, it was different. She stripped away all traces of Mark, repainting, refurnishing, imbuing the house with her own spirit, making it truly theirs. I spent countless hours there, helping her, offering not just physical labor, but the quiet presence of unwavering support. The children's healing was perhaps the most delicate process. Owen, now 15, was still guarded, but he slowly began to shed his fear, replacing it with a quiet maturity. He started seeing a therapist, processing the trauma, and finding his own voice. He even started spending more time with Artie, learning chess and discussing complex strategies, finding a new, healthy male role model. Lily, 11, was more openly expressive, her initial nightmares giving way to bursts of joyful laughter. She still missed the idealized version of her father, a ghost she mourned, but she understood, in her own way, that the man who had hurt her mother was not the father she deserved. She blossomed under Sarah's renewed attention and my unwavering affection. Sarah herself was a revelation. The fear that had once consumed her slowly receded, revealing the intelligent, witty, and resilient woman she truly was. She returned to her career, her confidence slowly rebuilding with each successful project. She joined a support group, finding strength and solidarity in shared experiences. Her face, though still bearing a faint scar where the bruise had been, now radiated a quiet strength, a wisdom earned through suffering. We often sat on her porch in the evenings, watching the sunset, talking not just about the past, but about the future, about new possibilities. My own life, too, had changed irrevocably. The quiet old woman was a persona I could no longer fully inhabit. My interactions with Artie, with Detective Harper, had shown me a different side of myself, a capacity for action and strategic thinking I hadn't known I possessed. My garden still brought me solace, my books still brought me joy, but they were now part of a larger, richer tapestry. I had proven to myself, and to the world, that age was no barrier to courage, that quiet strength could be as potent as any thunder. Artie and I maintained our friendship, often sharing coffee and discussing the curious intricacies of human nature. He still ran his bookstore, but now occasionally consulted on complex cases, a twinkle in his eye as he referred to our adventures. Detective Harper, true to his word, had quietly become a valuable contact, a man who understood that justice wasn't always found in black and white. One afternoon, a year after that fateful Christmas Eve, Sarah came to my house, a radiant smile on her face. "Mom," she said, hugging me tightly, "I got a new job. A promotion. And I finally feel free. Truly free." I held her, feeling the vibrant strength of her presence, the deep, abiding love that had fueled my fight. "You were always free, my darling," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You just had to remember how to find your way out of the cage." We walked out to my rose garden, its blossoms heavy and fragrant in the summer air. I watched Abby lazily drift from petal to petal. Life was a constant cycle of growth and decay, of struggle and renewal. The scars remained, a reminder of the battles fought, but they were also a testament to survival, to resilience. I looked at my reflection in the dew-kissed leaves of a rose, a woman with silver hair and wise, tired eyes. But in those eyes, there was no longer just the serenity of a quiet life. There was also the fire of a warrior, the wisdom of a survivor, and the profound contentment of a mother who had protected her own. I had learned that my quiet life was never truly quiet, it was simply a deeper, more profound kind of strength, a wellspring of resilience waiting to be tapped. I had found my voice, not in shouting, but in strategic action, in unyielding protection. The story wasn't over. It never truly is. Life continues, with its joys and its challenges. But the core conflict had been resolved. Mark Sterling was in prison, his empire dismantled, his power broken. And my family, though changed, was stronger, more authentic, forged in the fires of adversity. We had faced the storm, and we had weathered it. And in doing so, we had found a new horizon, one filled with hope and the quiet, enduring power of truth.